Most of what you remember from the books you have read is gone. Not partially gone, almost entirely gone. 3 weeks after you finish a book, you can recall the title, the general thesis, perhaps 2 or 3 vivid examples. The actual ideas, the structure of the argument, the specific evidence that made you nod when you read it, those are missing. You have spent thousands of hours of your life on books you cannot now reconstruct. And yet you keep reading the same way, because no one has told you there is another way to do it. I want to tell you what I did differently, not as the productivity hack, not as the reading technique, as a complete inversion of what schools taught you reading was for. By the end of this video, you will understand why your highlights and notes have been failing you, why a 5-hour reading session that builds genuine understanding is more valuable than a 50-hour reading binge that builds none, and the specific 4-step method I use to read fewer books than my classmates and understand them deeper than my professors. My name is Albert Einstein, and the method I am going to give you is the same one I used at the Zurich Polytechnic when I was barely passing my classes by official measures, while quietly building the understanding that would later become the special theory of relativity. The method takes longer per page. It produces less visible output. Your friends will think you are wasting time. By the end of 1 year, you will know more than they do. By the end of 5, the gap will be uncrossable. This is going to take about 25 minutes. The method itself is 4 steps. The hard part is admitting why the conventional method failed you in the first place. Let me begin by destroying the comfortable explanation, because until that explanation is gone, the method I am going to give you will sound unnecessary. The comfortable explanation is that you have a memory problem, that if only you took better notes, used a better app, found the right note-taking system, your retention would improve. This is false. Your memory is fine. The problem is not that you forget what you read. The problem is that you never built it in the first place. Reading the way you have been taught to read does not produce understanding. It produces a temporary state I will call recognition. You see the page. The words make sense as you read them. You feel as though you are absorbing them. When you encounter the same idea later, you recognize it. You feel familiar with it. You think this means you know it. You do not. You have only seen it before, which is a completely different thing from understanding it. Recognition fades within 48 hours. By the end of a week, most of what you read has decayed past usable recall. This is not a defect in your brain. This is what the brain does with information that arrives passively, without prediction, without struggle, without reconstruction. The brain marks such information as low priority and disposes of it accordingly. The first wrong answer everyone gives when I describe this is that the solution is more highlighting, more notes, more color coding, more marginalia. I want to take this apart specifically because the conviction is so strong. When I was a student in Zurich, my roommate, a young man named Marcel, kept the most beautiful notebooks I have ever seen. Different colored pens for different categories of idea, underlines for definitions, double underlines for theorems, asterisks for examples. His textbooks looked like illuminated manuscripts. I, by contrast, had nearly empty pages. Marcel covered 30 pages a night. I covered 10. By exam time, Marcel knew the material the way one knows the floor plan of a building one has walked through but never lived in. He could recite the contents of his notes back to me. He could not, when given a problem that required combining 3 concepts in a way the textbook had not done, solve it. I could, slowly and clumsily. The difference was not intelligence. He was, I think, more naturally talented than I was at almost everything academic. The difference was method. Here is a cognitive trick at the heart of the failure. When you highlight a sentence, your brain registers a sensation that feels like learning. I have processed this, I have marked it, I will return to it. The sensation is real, but the learning is not. Highlighting is the brain congratulating itself for noticing something, without doing the work of integrating it. The same trap exists for note-taking, especially the kind where you copy passages verbatim into a notebook or a digital app. Your hand moves. Words appear on a new page. The brain experiences the satisfying sensation of effort, but the effort is mechanical, not cognitive. You are transcribing, not thinking. The neurons that build the original thought are not the neurons being engaged when you copy it down. Modern tools have made this worse, not better. Highlighting apps that automatically save your highlights to a cloud, ready for review. Note-taking systems with elaborate tagging hierarchies. Spaced repetition apps that schedule your reviews. Each of these tools optimizes the wrong activity. They make recognition more efficient. They do nothing for understanding. I want to give you a number that should disturb you. Studies on reading comprehension consistently find that within 3 weeks, readers retain approximately 10 to 15% of the content of a book they have read once, even with notes and highlights. The number drops to under 5% after 3 months. This is not because readers are lazy or unintelligent. This is the predictable output of the method. You are putting in your hours. The method is wasting them. The second wrong answer, which is closer to the truth, is that you simply need to read more selectively. Read the right books rather than many books. This advice is correct as far as it goes, but it does not address the underlying problem. Reading the right book the wrong way is still wasted time. You can spend 3 months on the most important book in your field and retain nothing if your method does not engage understanding. The third wrong answer, the one I struggled with myself before I found my way to the method, is that the solution is teaching. That if you simply explain the material to someone else, you will absorb it deeply. This is half right and contains the seed of the actual answer, but applied without the rest of the method, it fails too. I learned this when I first started giving lectures at the University of Berlin in 1914. I would prepare a lecture by reading a relevant chapter, then immediately try to teach it. I assumed the act of teaching would force the understanding into place. What I discovered was that I could give a lecture that sounded coherent, that the students apparently understood, while my own grasp of the material remained shallow. I was performing fluency, not demonstrating understanding. The students received the same words I had received, slightly rearranged. The understanding had not been built, it had only been transmitted. It was a young student in my second year of teaching there who exposed this to me. After a lecture on Maxwell's equations, he came up to me and asked a question that should have been simple. Why does the equation for the magnetic field require this particular form? Not how do we use it? Why does it look like this? Where does it come from? I started to answer and realized, midway through my own sentence, that I did not know. I had taught the equation. I had used the equation. I had never derived it from the underlying experiments. The student had asked the one question my method could not answer. That was the moment I realized teaching alone was not enough. Teaching must be combined with something earlier in the process, with the act of building the idea from below before you ever attempt to give it to someone else. Otherwise, teaching is just a more elaborate form of recitation. The mechanism that builds genuine understanding is reconstruction. Not consumption, not annotation, not even teaching alone. Reconstruction. You must rebuild the idea from its foundation, in your own words, using your own logic, on a blank page, without looking at the source. And only then, when you can rebuild it, do you actually understand it. Anything less than that is recognition wearing the clothing of understanding. Let me tell you about the year that taught me this lesson permanently. It was 1903. I was working at the patent office in Bern. I had finished my studies, but I had not yet published anything significant. In the evenings, I had a small group of friends who met to read together. We called ourselves, half mockingly, the Olympia Academy. There were 3 of us regular members. We would choose a book and read it together over weeks or months. We would meet in my apartment, eat sausage and cheese, and argue about what we had read. The book that changed how I read forever was a treatise by Ernst Mach on the science of mechanics. Maurice and Conrad, my 2 friends, read it the way most educated people read difficult books, carefully, with notes, marking interesting passages. They finished their first reading of the relevant chapters within 2 weeks. I had not yet finished the first chapter. What I was doing, on those evenings alone before our meetings, was something Maurice and Conrad found incomprehensible. I would read a paragraph, close the book, take a blank piece of paper, and try to write down, in my own words, what Mach had argued in that paragraph. Not summarize his words, reconstruct his reasoning. Why did he claim what he claimed? What evidence did he assemble? What was the logical move that took him from the evidence to the conclusion? When I could do this, I would open the book and check. Almost always, my reconstruction was wrong somewhere. I had missed a step in the argument. I had assumed something he had not yet established. I had skipped over an example that turned out to be load-bearing. I would mark that gap. Read the paragraph again. Try the reconstruction again. It would take me an hour to absorb a paragraph that Maurice could read in 3 minutes. But here is what happened. By the time we met to discuss the chapter, Maurice and Conrad could repeat Mach's argument fluently. They could not, when I asked, explain why Mach had taken a particular step in the argument rather than an alternative step that seemed equally plausible. They had taken his words. They had not taken his thinking. 3 months later, when we had moved on to other books, Maurice could still recall the general thesis of Mach. He could not, if pressed, derive a single specific claim. The book had passed through him without depositing anything. What I retained, by contrast, did not feel like having read a book. It felt like having had a conversation with Mach. I did not remember his words exactly. I remembered the structure of his thinking because I had rebuilt that structure inside my own mind. The structure was no longer his. It was mine. And once it was mine, I could use it. I want to anticipate the objection that comes up now, because it is the objection that stops most people from trying this. You are thinking that this method is impossibly slow, that if you spent an hour on every paragraph, you would never get through any book, that in the time you spent absorbing 1 chapter properly, you could have read 3 books superficially. This is true, and it does not matter, for a specific reason. 3 books read superficially produce within 3 months almost nothing. Their content has decayed past usable recall. Your time invested in them is mostly lost. 1 chapter absorbed deeply produces something you will still have in 5 years, in 10 years, in 40 years. You can use it to build. You can use it to teach. You can use it to argue against. You own it. The question is not how many pages you cover. The question is how many pages remain inside you a year later. By that measure, the slow method is dramatically faster than the fast method. The fast method produces high apparent throughput and low actual retention. The slow method produces low apparent throughput and high retention. Multiply across years, and the slow reader has a deeper library than the fast reader by an enormous margin. I have spoken with men who claim to have read several thousand books in their lives. I have asked them, when the conversation went on long enough, to explain in detail the argument of any one of them. They cannot. They have read past the words on those pages. They have not read the books. The books are not in them anymore. They were never there. The men have a list of titles and a strong feeling that they have been intellectually active. They have been busy. They have not been understanding. I want to give you the second piece of the method now, because reconstruction alone is necessary but not sufficient. The second piece is what I came to call ignorance mapping, and I want to ground it in a specific habit I kept for most of my working life. In my study at Princeton, where I lived from 1933 until I died, I kept a notebook in the top drawer of my desk. The notebook was not for ideas I had. It was for ideas I did not yet have. Specifically, it was for questions I could not answer, problems I could not solve, claims I could not verify. When I encountered something in a book or a conversation that I did not understand, I wrote it down in that notebook. I did not try to immediately resolve it. I let it sit. The notebook was always growing. Some entries stayed for years before they were resolved. Some were resolved by accident, when I encountered in another book or in a conversation a piece that fit. Some I finally tackled directly, going back to a specific source to read more carefully. A few were never resolved at all and remained open questions for the rest of my life. The notebook was the most valuable possession I owned, more valuable than any of my published papers, because it was the map of the actual frontier of my understanding. The papers were just the parts of the frontier I had managed to push outward. The notebook was where the work was happening. Most readers do the opposite. They read to feel they understand. When they encounter a paragraph they do not fully grasp, the temptation is to read past it, telling themselves they will return later. They do not return. The unresolved gap accumulates beneath the surface and becomes invisible. They believe they understand the book because they finished it. They have built their understanding on hidden cracks. The ignorance map inverts this. You read with permission to not understand. When you reach a paragraph that does not click, you do not gloss over it. You write it in the notebook exactly. The specific claim you cannot follow. The exact place the logic stopped making sense. The question you would need answered to move forward. Then you continue reading. The unanswered question is no longer hiding. It is waiting for the right input that will resolve it. Within a year of keeping such a notebook, you will notice something strange. Connections that would have been invisible become visible. A book you read in March will partially answer a question you wrote down in January, and you will catch the connection because the question was on the page in front of you. The notebook becomes the substrate that turns separate readings into integrated understanding. Now I want to make this about you, because I do not want to leave you with the abstract version of these ideas. You have books, right now, in your bookshelf or on your e-reader that you have read. You believe you have absorbed them. I want you to perform a simple test. Pick the book you would say has influenced you most over the last 5 years. Without opening it, take a blank piece of paper and write down the central argument of that book in your own words. Not a summary, the argument, the thesis, the evidence, the structure of how the author got from premise to conclusion. Most people, even people who consider themselves intellectually serious, will discover within 30 seconds that they cannot do this. They can write down the title. They can write down the general topic. They can write down the conclusion. They cannot rebuild the argument. The author's thinking is not in them. They have only the impression that the book left. This is not a personal failing. This is the predictable result of the reading method that everyone is using. The method does not produce what we believe it produces. We come away from books with a sensation of having grown when we have only experienced. The growth, if it happens, requires a process the method actively prevents. Now imagine the alternative. Imagine that for the last 5 years you had been reading using the method I have described. You would have read fewer books, possibly half as many, possibly a quarter. But the books you had read would be in you. You could explain them, defend them, argue with them, apply them. You would be a different intellectual person than you are now, not because you would have learned more, but because what you had learned would have stayed. This is not theoretical. This is the difference between the colleagues I worked with at Princeton who could only repeat the orthodoxies of their fields and the few who could think originally. The originality was almost never about innate brilliance. It was about reading methods. The original thinkers had absorbed their reading. The orthodox thinkers had merely processed theirs. Now I want to give you the method specifically because vague conclusions produce no change in behavior. There are 4 practices. They build on each other. You should add them one at a time because if you try all 4 immediately, you will burn out and abandon the method within a week. The first practice is the 1-paragraph rule. Find a book you genuinely want to absorb, not a book you should read, a book you want to take into yourself. Read the first paragraph slowly. Close the book. On a blank piece of paper, in your own words, write down what the paragraph established. Not a summary, the argument, the claim, the reasoning the author used to make it. Then open the book and check. The first time you do this, you will feel a specific kind of frustration. Your reconstruction will be wrong in places. You will have missed claims, conflated examples, smoothed over crucial qualifications. This frustration is the method working. It is showing you with brutal precision the gap between what you thought you had absorbed and what you actually absorbed. Most reading hides this gap. The method exposes it. Do this for 1 paragraph a day on the book you most want to absorb. Just 1. After 30 days, you will have absorbed 30 paragraphs deeply. That is more than most readers absorb from an entire book read conventionally. The second practice is what I call the closing the book test. After reading a longer section, perhaps a chapter, close the book. Out loud, explain the chapter to an imaginary student who knows nothing about the topic. Not a peer, not a colleague who would fill in the gaps from their existing knowledge. A bright 15-year-old. Use simple words, use analogies. Reconstruct the argument from the foundation upward. You will discover almost immediately the precise sentences where your understanding fails. You will start a sentence and find you cannot finish it. You will reach for a word and find you cannot find a simple version of it. These failures are gifts. They are the inventory of what the chapter has not yet given you. Mark those specific points. Return to those specific paragraphs. Do not return to the whole chapter. Return surgically. The third practice is the ignorance notebook. I described it earlier in detail, so I will keep this brief. Keep a single notebook for the questions you cannot answer. Not a list of things you want to read. A list of specific gaps in your understanding. When you encounter something you do not grasp, write the gap. Be specific. Not the topic of confusion, the exact claim you cannot follow. The notebook serves two purposes. It removes the pressure to immediately resolve every confusion, which is what causes most readers to skip past their gaps and pretend they have absorbed material they have not. And it creates a record of your actual frontier, which becomes a curriculum more valuable than any reading list ever assigned to you. Review the notebook every week or so. Cross off questions that have been answered by the same book or by something else you have read since. Notice patterns. The same kind of gap appearing repeatedly is a signal that there is a foundational concept you are missing, and finding the right book to fill that foundation will resolve dozens of surface confusions at once. The fourth practice, and the hardest, is the teaching test. Once a month, pick one of the books you have been working through, not a section of it, the whole thing, and write in 2 pages the central argument of the book as if you were teaching it to someone who would never read the book themselves. They have only your 2 pages. They must walk away with the actual content of the book in compressed form, not just an impression of the book. This will be hard. The first time you will discover that you do not know the book as well as you thought, despite having read it carefully. That discovery is not failure. It tells you exactly which sections to return to. By the time you can write those 2 pages clearly, the book is in you. It is part of your intellectual furniture. You can sit with it, argue with it, build on it. Here is what I want you to carry out of this. The reading method you were taught is not slow. It only feels slow when you think the goal is to get through the book. The goal is not to get through the book. The goal is to take the book into yourself, where it will remain. The conventional method is faster at finishing pages and almost completely useless at producing what reading is for. The method I have given you is slower at finishing pages and dramatically more effective at the actual purpose. You will spend more time per page. You will read fewer books. Your friends will mention books they have read that you have not. You will feel occasionally like you are falling behind. You will not be falling behind. You will be moving in a different direction, toward depth, while they move toward breadth that does not last. In 5 years, the difference will be visible. They will have a long list of titles and a vague sense of being well read. You will have a smaller library that lives inside your head, that you can summon without looking, that you can use to do real work. You will be able to think with what you have read. They will only be able to mention what they have read. That is the difference between knowing a book and having read it. Schools never taught you to know books. They taught you to read them. These are not the same activity. They have different methods, different costs, and different outputs. The fact that you spent 20 years confusing them is not your fault. The institutions that taught you reading optimized for what they could measure, which was completion rates, not for what mattered, which was retention. You can rebuild the right method now. It takes longer, especially at first. The first month you will hate it. By the 3rd month, you will start to notice that books you absorbed using this method are still in you, while books you read in the months before have already faded. By the end of the year, the difference will be undeniable, and you will not want to go back. The question I want to leave you with is specific. Pick a book you have read in the last 2 years that you considered important. Right now, before you do anything else, see if you can reconstruct its central argument on a blank page. Just that. The thesis, the evidence, the reasoning. If you can, you have absorbed that book, and the method is already partially yours. If you cannot, you have just learned something important. The book you thought you had inside you is not there. It was always going to leave. The method I have described is what would have made it stay. The next book you read can be different. Which book are you going to absorb next? And how are you going to read it this time? That question has a real answer, and the answer is where your real reading begins.